Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
No, it's my pleasure. And I am very excited for the conversation today because we're going to cover something that, frankly, I don't know enough about. And I know that I don't know enough about it because I've been reading some of your newsletter. So we'll dive in straight away there. Late last night, I'm like, oh, look, here's a fresh article. Let's have a look. And you're talking about Iran and you're talking about mind control and the ability to in some ways shift reality is probably how I would kind of summarize it. So how on earth did you end up writing about that particular subject? And I'll let you just take it away with wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah, sure. I think shift reality, I wouldn't say shift, but definitely shape someone's perspective on reality. Um,
Okay.
but the way I got there, so I grew up I was born into a cult. I was in it only until I was 7, but many decades later had to sort of go back and understand all of the psychological impacts that had on me. And as part of that process, I started really diving into this concept of mind control. So I think, most people understand that cults use mind control, or there's something pretty weird going on in any case for kind of cults. Um, but I was reading and reading, and it's just kind of consumed my life. And what I realized, and all of the literature talks about this, is that mind control is not just in cults, but it's used across many facets of society. It's a very analogous process. So you have a very strong crossover between cults and terrorism, for instance. You have very well documented that the Chinese, the rise of the Maoist party, used mind control, cult-like mind control indoctrination in how they kind of created the movement, and then ultimately took over China and use it now in China. So there's a lot of all the literature talks about how totalitarian regimes use mind control. So I kind of went looking for the articles and the books and the literature really detailing how they do it, and I couldn't find it. It really doesn't exist. And I was quite shocked at how kind of absent from the public discourse this discussion around mind control was, when it's really driving so much of global geopolitics, whether it's understanding what's going on in the minds of Chinese people, the Chinese government, what's going on in the minds of, the Iranians, or all of these different regimes, why they behave the way they do, how they control populations, how terrorism operates, and then even how political division. Anyway, I can go into it, but it was just really surprising to me how much it seemed to be driving the world, and how little there was being kind of talked about and spoken about on the topic.
Wow. Okay. I mean, what a way to tee up a conversation. So fascinating. I cannot go any further than the moment that you understood you were in a cult yourself. So what on earth happened there?
I always had this story that I had grown up in a spiritual community. That's kind of what we called it. And I didn't really think much of it. We left when I was 7, as I said.
Mm-hmm.
We got kicked out, basically. Long story. My mum had left, and then, they were not okay with us having a relationship with someone that wasn't in the cult. So it was sort of this ultimatum, and ultimately my dad and my brother and I left. And so I didn't think too much of it. My parents then got divorced. We were still quite close to my dad, but at some point he started going back to the group. We called it the group, or just Kenja was what it was called. It still is. And still didn't really think much of it in my 20s. Still had a relationship with my dad. Would see him once in a while, but he would always speak what we call Kenja speak. Like, you couldn't have a conversation. It was like I would say something, and then he would say something, which we would call Kenja speak. And
Wow.
even then, I just was like, this was just this weird thing in my life. It wasn't, I didn't think much of it. And it was really not until 4 or 5 years ago, well, he sort of stopped having contact with us over time, sort of just refused calls, refused texts. So then I started to sort of think about it more and realized, okay, it's become a cult was the framing. Okay, it was a
Mm.
spiritual community, was how I thought about it. That became a cult over time, and that's why my dad, no longer wanted to talk to us. But then it was a conversation with a friend who'd grown up in a high control, she calls it a high control kind of Jewish community, and she sort of said to me, like, have you actually thought about whether what you grew up in was actually always a cult? And
Wow.
thought about maybe how that's impacted you, because she had been going through that process herself. So that's really what kicked it off. It was sitting in a cafe in LA that I still remember the conversation, and she recommended one book to me, and then I started reading that, and then it kind of has just really gone from there.
Wow. It's so extraordinary how one can almost map very specific moments to the timeline that is life that radically alters the trajectory of where you end up going. So what were there a lot of similarities between your friends' experience in the high control Jewish environment and what you'd been through? And immediately just like the penny started dropping, like, oh, hang on, what if this wasn't like, and how did that feel as well? I mean, it must be such a difficult moment to start to recognize what that was.
Yeah, I think it's funny because so many interests in my life sort of had been pointing me in this direction. And I
Mm,
just, like, I always had this fascination with kind of, I know it's weird, but like violence and how people could do such violent things to each other and genocide. And I would read
mm,
Hannah Arendt and the origins of totalitarianism, like long before this. So I always had this sort of interest, I guess, in what now I understand is how people can be controlled and manipulated, and the people that do it to do really horrific things. So I always had this interest. I just didn't. So it was almost like it was always coming up and trying to sort of integrate into my conscious mind. And when I did, I honestly it was liberating because it was it was like, oh, now it all makes sense, and now I have this sort of framework and this path to understand myself and understand the world. And it was just the more I started reading, the more I found it interesting, and it has
mm,
helped me so much in my own psychology. And because there's, it's I'm not the first one to go through this, and lots of children who grew up in these high control environments have very similar psychological traits. And so just having a roadmap, having someone that's written a book about this, and then I can just read it and say, oh, this is great, yeah, this makes
mm.
sense, and it just makes it all yeah, it's quite liberating actually.
Okay, cool. And I'm feeling drawn to asking about this. Like, does evil exist? And like, what are the people that drive these types of scenarios also conscious of what they're doing or indoctrinated by the ideology itself? And what makes people do it?
This is such a good question. It's been such a good question because you see the same sort of psychological manipulation tactics that cult leaders are using. And I've been kind of questioning, do they read it? Do they study it? Or do
Mm,
they just kind of figure it out as they go? And I think it might be a combination, or it's probably different for each one. But the more I kind of study this, and it's, this is not an original idea. Lots of people have come to the same conclusion, or, the theory has been out there that so much of history is driven by a very, very small minority of people who are genuinely kind of on the psychopathic tendency,
mm,
kind of narcissistic psychopathic, that I would class. I don't like to be black and white,
mm,
because but that are genuinely pretty evil people.
mm.
Um, and there are just genuinely people that are born without the capacity for empathy, and they and so they're driving a lot of history. And so if you look at sort of all of these really intense things that have happened, or wars, yeah, there is often one or two people at the top that seem to be driving a lot of it,
Mm.
um, which maybe you could call evil, but it certainly creates evil in the world.
Yeah, and it's that interesting idea of like history is written by the victors, and this is something that's really only come into my consciousness in the last 5 years as well. Frankly, it's like, oh, hang on, why do I know what I know? Do you know what I mean? It's like, who taught me that? And in particular, reading your article last night about some of the tactics of the Iranian regime and the age of the schooling system that's specifically like wielded like as a weapon to indoctrinate a set of ideas. And just to, I guess, mention a very specific use case in my life, like if I think about growing up in England, a history lesson was learning about the kings and queens of England. Why? How are they? Did they win? Yes, they won. So they write the history book. And I'm now in a position where I'm looking at my own children and thinking about how do I want to navigate their education. And we've actually gone down the homeschooling route. That's almost like a whole nother podcast. I don't want to go down that. But what does it mean then when the history can be written by someone, or when the educational textbook can be written by someone? It's almost like it's a good example of centralization and then the ability of corruption to get to the very top on behalf of someone else's agenda. So is that a recurring theme that you've seen through your research you've been doing? And is that just a natural phenomenon, or what do we do about it?
Yeah, great question. I think it is a natural phenomenon. I think it's not all bad. Like mind control, I think is not all bad because there is an extent to which in a functioning democracy, you want a degree of kind of cohesion. You want a degree of shared narrative. You want people to have some sort of shared values, shared foundation. And those values could be for democracy, for freedom, and for respect, institutions. And so having an education system that actually does indoctrinate that is actually not necessarily a bad thing. I just started looking into it. I need to go more, but Denmark actually seems to have a very interesting education system where they've had some thinkers that they really respect, and so they're bringing the idea of debate and liberal democracy into the education system in a really interesting way that other countries, even in Europe, don't. So I think we actually have a problem now where we don't have enough we don't have leaders at the top who are actually sort of creating shared narratives and bringing the country together in a sort of positive way. They're actually dividing it. And it's almost like you need to figure out what are the shared things that we all can agree on and focus on that and bring people together. That then you're sitting on top of it and having debates about sort of the sub issues. So I don't think it's necessarily all bad, but it can become and it can be used very, very badly depending on who kind of wields it, I guess. So you could have, sorry.
No, that's okay, Andy. I don't mean to cut in, but the thought that's on my mind, that the relevance of this is just if you map back to nature. It's like, okay, I more and more become persuaded by libertarian type thinking. And there's no doubt that Bitcoin plays a part in this, right? And separating money from state and all the problems that represents. Again, a whole other podcast. But it's interesting because if I was to strike out alone as a single human being and not live in a tribe, I would really struggle. / it's not worth the effort, because you don't get the economies of scale, you don't get the shared skill sets, you don't get the collaboration, you don't get trade, which is so clearly something very unique to the human being species versus everything else that we share this planet with. So I'm intrigued by this idea then that maybe mind control of a group is actually a defense mechanism, like a tribe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
cool.
there's definitely an evolutionary reason. Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you. It makes complete evolutionary sense that this happened. So if we think about humans being programmable, so mind control effectively says you can program a human.
Yeah.
Which we kind of know children can. Children grow up basically indoctrinated by what their parents think, by what's around them. But that's a really logical survival skill for a child, because if you have a child that grows up independent thinker and doesn't fit with the tribe, that's quite dangerous for them. So you want people to sort of, and you would have had a natural selection for people who do actually have this ability to conform and fit in with the tribe and believe in the tribe. And so there's definitely an evolutionary basis for why you want a degree of programmability innate in a human to sort of fit into the tribe. At the same time, if there's too much cohesion, you don't have innovation, you don't have exploration, you don't have people who are ambitious and leading and moving the tribe forward. So over time, you would have, if you have too much sort of cohesion, too much mind control in a group, that group may not win out in the long run. And that's certainly what we see in, say, highly authoritarian countries over time versus countries with more democracy and freedom. You see a lot more innovation, a lot more economic kind of growth in those countries versus authoritarian countries, which can't produce the same level of kind of forward progress.
Yeah, interesting. So that's almost like there's a movie I watched in it's like almost like a scale. There's a movie I watched years ago now. It's a British comedy movie called Hot Fuzz, and it talks about the greater good, and there's this little village, and they're trying to save the village for the greater good. And the analogy being is there's so clearly so many places I see in my life, in business as well, where it's like the business has to survive over and above perhaps individual members of it. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. Why would that be the case? And what we're describing here is a very obvious reason for that, is it's a defense mechanism. But then equally, these organizations couldn't survive unless someone splintered off. And then the next way I'm really thinking about that, I guess, is at some point, a European ship sailed west. And at some point, they hit the Americas. And it was inevitable that it would happen because of the outlier. Wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so now that you've started looking at this in a more rigorous manner, do you see it everywhere?
I do. I do.
Really? Wow,
I
cool.
try not, but I try to not, like with Iran, for instance, it would be, I could write an article and say, oh, it's all about mind control. And it's not. Like they use so much just outright repression. And so where you say, okay, they're trying to use mind control, like let's actually evaluate it. And a big question I have is, say somewhere like China, this is a research question I'm going to try and kind of work more on this year, is like what's the level of actual belief? What does it do? Like how many people actually believe, or it's just sort of physical repression that's causing it? I mean, so that I do see it everywhere in society in general, and particularly in spiritual narratives and spiritual teachers and, personal development. I do see it everywhere, but I also see like a lot of really constructive, positive kind of things as well. So I try not to get too caught up in it.
Yeah, well, and it's one of those things you can get a bit bogged down, can't you? Like, and you recognize this pattern and you kind of want to shake someone perhaps. Andy, I'm intrigued though. So you started your newsletter in the last few months. Why? And has it been valuable to you so far?
Yeah, I just started. I do want to write a book about this. I just have so much research I've done across so many different things that I have found so fascinating. And I have so many conversations with people, and I find many people find it quite interesting. So, but I wanted to just start sharing and start becoming a better writer, kind of getting into the habit of writing, figuring out how to share things, what resonates with people. So it's really kind of an exploration, and I'm just getting started, but I love it. I love writing. I love researching. So, I absolutely love the process regardless of kind of where it goes.
And so teach me how you do that. Everyone has different ways, but do you have inspiration moments? That'd be a cool idea to pull upon, or do you have like a weekly slot where you sit down and you just write something? What's the creative process?
I've been traveling a lot still the past few months. I'm shifting my life to be much more in one place, so I'm still not in a good habit, but I would say it's more ad hoc. I have a whole list of kind of topics that I would like to write articles about. I had this idea of writing sort of a foundational series of this is how mind control works. But I think that's a little too abstract and technical for people. So what I'm shifting to is more sort of case studies and stories. And then particularly as I see world events like what's going on in Iran, I had wanted to write articles about Iran for a while. And so I thought it made sense to bring that up and kind of do those earlier.
Interesting. And like always, the ideation or creative process, it's like build it and they will come, or study the market and create something that's definitely needed. And there's a sweet spot somewhere where you're, obviously that list that you've got, that's very much like more of a build it and they will come type vibe. It's like, I want to write about this stuff. Oh, but hang on, what do people want to read? So how do you dovetail those two things? It's very natural, I'm sure, but
no, I'm figuring that out. That's very much kind of what I'm figuring out right in this moment, I would say, is I think that the Substack is very much, that's what I kind of was saying. It's like for me to write and see what resonates with people, see how I can communicate and what people want to listen to or read ultimately. So it's very much an iteration, get lots of feedback, start kind of just putting the ideas out there more and get feedback and go from there. And then there's also research that I want to do, and that will go into sort of the longer term, longer term work on it.
Yeah, and Substack seems to be great for the longer form writing. And an email is a very private process in a way. It's like, oh, boom, I've like literally got an email to read from whoever it might be. Andy, I'm intrigued to just kind of almost maybe go a bit closer to home and think about some of the experiences that I personally went through the last few years that essentially everyone did, but had a unique journey. But the 2020 COVID-19 experience and global lockdowns, digital censorship. I mean, there's so many different things we can talk through here, but a clearly globally organized plan, intra-government, at a level that like basically we've never seen before. It's like, oh, all businesses shut down except for the ones that we say are okay, and blah, blah, blah. It was just crazy, crazy time. But it really highlighted to me in some ways, it's like who are the government that I've trusted my whole life? It's very easy to like China this or Iran that from oh, we're okay and they're, authoritarian, totalitarian regimes. But I was under house arrest essentially in central Melbourne in Australia for almost 2 years. Extraordinary experience. And there's no way that it's possible without a form of mind control. Because otherwise everyone's like, hang on a second, no one's actually sick. And I can't go to the football, I can't go to the office, I can't work, my kids can't go to school. Well, this is crazy. I say no. But no one did that. Everyone just stayed at home on an extraordinary scale. And there were some marches and stuff that we got involved in at one point, and you could see the social unrest building and building and building, the government becoming more and more, the police more and more threatening, like literally just police everywhere. It's crazy. It's like, no, the populace don't have guns, so you can't fight back. So you have to trust that this organization is having your interests at heart. And then it's like, oh, by the way, you've got to take this medicine to get out. And the medicines then made a whole lot of people really, really, really sick. And it's like, what the hell just happened? So when I think through like democracy, sounds great, but like, is it? And does it exist purely with mind control? So I don't know if that resonates at all, but it's like, hang on a sec, what's going on? Who am I voting for?
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with you. And for me personally, COVID and what happened during that was a big waking up moment. I mean, I really had trust in the government before that in Australia. I never thought about these things. I always thought the Americans who care about individualism were crazy, gun-toting rednecks from Texas. I know, I live in Texas and see things differently.
Yeah, wow.
And it was completely crazy. And so this is why I think it's so I kind of thought, okay, this is what mind control is, this whole topic. Okay, so what's the opposite? And so I've come up with this term cognitive sovereignty, and this idea that you kind of have ownership of your own mind, you have agency, you're actually making decisions, you're not stuck in someone else's worldview. And as I think about democracy, do we really live in a democracy if we don't actually have freedom of thought, if we don't have individual cognitive sovereignty? And so I think about cognitive sovereignty as being foundational for democracy. And I don't think we have that right now. I think democracy in its current form still is much better than any other form of government. So I don't want to sort of get into the democracy is bad, everything in the West is bad. More what we have needs to be improved and protected, and let's figure out how to do that. But I do really worry about what's going on in Australia and places like the UK and Europe and parts of the US around particularly speech and freedom of speech. And it's really scary because freedom of speech is completely fundamental. Being able to have conversation, being able to dissent, being able to have debate is foundational to having democracy and to having freedom of thought and democracy. And I don't think we have that right now in Australia. And in the UK and Europe, where you have effectively speech laws and kind of hate crimes and government censorship of, online censorship and identity verification. And it's gradually eroding the freedom that democracy is built upon and makes it much easier to sort of get the nation as a whole into a sort of single feedback loop of mind control. And that's certainly, I think, what we saw through the pandemic. Mind control is very interwoven, and you can't separate out from this concept of groupthink. So a lot of mind control is driven by conformity, by memetics, by identity, by in-out group language, which is it's very driven by group dynamics. And so in COVID, I think you had that happening in an extreme way, where you had this true, and mind control really works best when there's a threat, when there's like fear, and fear is the most profound emotion. So all mind control works by attaching to emotions. And so you had a genuine fear. Like I remember at the start of COVID, we didn't know what was going on. It was genuinely scary. Like it was the first time we'd been told we had a pandemic. And so once those ideas get latched in on the emotional level, it's very hard to sort of deprogram, to sort of break those. And so I think that's really what you saw during the pandemic, was this sort of like identity, this fear, this in-out group. You had behavior control with the masks. You had so much of sort of the classic mind control things that were going on. I don't know if it was some big orchestrated thing. I think there were a lot of people in government genuinely thought they were doing the right thing, and then got stuck in their own messiah complex of them saving the world, and therefore ends justifies the means. I think that's maybe what happened more than necessarily sort of some, I just don't know. I don't have evidence that there's like a cabal driving the world, but certainly what ended up happening looked like that. And so whether it was some crazy group think phenomena, I think there was this ends justifies the means, messiah complex, people in power. Suddenly it was, their day to get to be in power, and it was really, really bad. And democracy, you had suddenly no freedom overnight for an unjustified reason.
Just crazy experience to go through as adults. It's something that I'm sure in many years to come, be like, what was that like? You're like, well, when my wife was pregnant, I was laughing to myself. I know what you mean. For the first time in years, I was watching the news, and I was here in Byron Bay with my wife, who was like 6 months pregnant with our first child. And my mum was visiting from England, and we got so quote unquote scared by what this thing was that we were thinking about, how do we get back to Melbourne? Are we going to drive back because the airport might be dangerous? And then my mum was like much more like chilled about the whole thing, and was like cruising to restaurants and stuff. And we had to make this decision. It's like, well, what if she's caught it? She might have got it in the last 24 hours. So the last time I saw her for 2.5 years was at a 3-meter distance on a beach, like just up the road, to say goodbye. It's like, you've lost your mind. You completely lost your mind in that moment. And you're like, what happened there? Completely rational person. And you're like thinking about like protecting your wife. So the first wave of that.
In a way.
Correct, yeah. But the first wave of that was just so effective at hitting the fear button.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was a number of months later. Oh, hang on. You're still there? Sorry, my Google Maps popped up.
Yep.
A number of months later, I'm sort of like, oh, hang on a sec. This doesn't make sense. What's going on? So I can see why people get into that state. And I'm sure it's also, again, it's that nature thing, the group think. It's like threat, get rid of it, Oh, wow, what an experience. Well, Andy, what I'd love to do now, if that's possible, about halfway through, is shift gears into more of an investment lens and your day job, and just hear about how it's been going. So, you guys, one of the leading venture funds in the Bitcoin space, and I've just more and more been looking at like how these companies are going to really start to grow, and what's the next chapter actually look like. So how are you finding things on that front? And the mind control stuff, fascinating, but I assume is a piece of the day that you kind of sneak a bit here and there, and you're focused mostly on your investing stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's been interesting how it sort of links in, and I'm just about to sort of start promoting it. And it's like, what I realized is in Bitcoin, we think about a lot of the external controls, and how the government is controlling us, how the financial system, how the monetary system, like external freedom and external control. And I think what I'm really now focused on is the sort of the internal freedom and the internal controls. So anyway, I think.
Well, and that's, Andy, let me.
That's good. Okay.
Am I still there?
Yeah, all good.
Let me draw on that for a second, because it's actually really interesting. There is a community called Decentralized Consciousness, which you may or may not have come across. And I've had Caleb on the podcast in the past, and Sam Gustafsson as well. And one of the things from that experience that I thought was so interesting was this idea of meditation as a way of connecting to consciousness and that being sovereign. So whatever your meditation tells you is a sense of cognitive sovereignty because no one else is telling you that. Have you had any experiences along those lines? And the second part of the question will then be is like, if you can see people thinking more like that, are they a good investment?
Are they good investors? I think
Yeah.
self-awareness is always something we look for in founders.
Okay.
That's definitely something we would invest in. Meditation's an interesting one. Meditation can kind of go either way. I've done a lot of study. I've studied Buddhism. I've gone deep down a lot of spiritual practices actually, and meditation can be used either. So a lot of mind control is suppressing emotion. So emotion is always true. Emotion is sort of this incredible evolutionary tool that humans have evolved to navigate the world and social kind of environments. And a big problem at the world right now is emotion is sort of demonized, and we repress it instead of integrating it. And so when we all repress it as a society, then it gets projected outward in one, or comes out in one way or another. So what a lot of cults do is actually use thought-stopping practices. So if you're in a high control environment or an abusive environment or a cult, and you have this feeling that comes up, which is like, what the fuck is going on? I shouldn't be here. I hate this. So the cult wants to teach you to suppress all of your emotions. So, that's just a reaction. All you need to do is sit for 10 minutes, chant this mantra, and you can get rid of that reaction and be a good little cult member. So a lot of meditation can be taught that what we want to do is have no thoughts, have no emotions. And that's like the sort of mind control version. The better version of meditation is meta awareness. So, and you can use like mantra, there's nothing wrong with it as long as it's not to repress and to stop. And every time you get upset, you just go chant a mantra for 10 minutes and then come back and you're like totally dissociated. So when meditation is used to enhance awareness, so you're now taking a step back and observing your thoughts, saying, oh wow, that's interesting, I had this thought come through, okay, I'm not going to like focus on it, I'm just going to let it go, but maybe I'm going to come back to it. So it's just being able to sort of take a step back and being able to observe yourself and build greater self-awareness, and not be stuck in that thought and in that fear, but being able to sort of observe it and understand it, see a fear come up and say, oh, is that something that's, just a trigger, or is it actually a genuine fear? Do I need to take some action? Am I upset? It's about integrating and taking appropriate response to an emotion as opposed to kind of suppressing it. So with meditation, it's very interlinked with the idea of cognitive sovereignty, but it also is very nuanced, I would say.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating reply, because an idea comes from somewhere. The idea maybe is a thought. Thought becomes a word. There's then a big step to action. So like you can think about killing someone. You can talk to someone about killing someone, but then you actually have to do it. And the same can be applied to a good thing, right? You can think about having a child. You can talk about having a child, and then you actually, you have to have the child. So great point, because just because a meditation tells you X doesn't mean you go and specifically do that. So the filter that one has on that experience is crucial. And I do think that's perhaps where you get these like spiritual gurus where they say, oh, I meditated and I went to this place and I now have this enlightened view of the world and now you need to listen to me. It's like,
Classic
right?
guru. This is, I had this enlightenment, and it's unchallengeable. So you always want an unchallengeable source in a good mind control system. Unchallengeable source, God, or this is a revelation.
Yes.
Classic.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. And this is something I really find interesting, because at the stage of investment that you're functioning, it's a bet on a person or a group of people. And so how you understand that person's mind is possibly the biggest decision you have to make. So how do you figure that out?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say in the second fund, we're investing slightly later. We're more at the Series A stage. And so the nice thing about that is you're looking for real revenue, the business that by that point has multi-million dollars worth of revenue. So what we look at when we get to know founders is we'll have conversations with them, but it's very hard to get to know someone because they're always presenting sort of this best version of themselves and you're talking about the business. We'll always meet them in person. But what you look at is sort of what's going on under the surface in the business. So you can look at how they respond to things. What have they prioritized? What are they not doing well? What are they doing well? What does that tell you about the person? Are they or how they respond to a suggestion or how they respond to a question? And then we might have conversations if there's something that we're not understanding. It's like, what's actually going on in this person's mind? Do they have some sort of fear? Do they have some sort of overconfidence, some sort of personal weakness? Do they not? So it's a huge component, but it's actually very difficult to do, I would say. So it's something we sort of study, and we study these kind of frameworks that, say, police use or different sort of interrogators use. We don't, we're not interrogating people, but it is something we've thought through a bit.
But it's cool though. It's about taking ideas from different places and reapplying them to the unique space where you're trying to operate. And if a interrogation technique helps you understand an opportunity better, then absolutely use it. It's interesting. So can you please teach me how you've shifted then towards more of a growth phase? Because it's definitely something I'm looking at more and more, where Bitcoin's maturing, founders are maturing, businesses are maturing, and starting to see like decent monthly recurring revenue stats come through where you're like, well, this is actually a different type of investment to hardcore seed stage venture. So why the shift to the slightly later, and what opportunity do you see there?
We saw a big gap at the Series A stage when we created the first fund in 2022, which was focused on the seed stage. At that point in time, there was a gap at the seed stage in terms of funds that were leading rounds. There were quite a few funds that were writing checks into the space, call it 500,000 to $1 million, but no funds that were really taking professional leads and really supporting the founders. So that was the thesis for the first fund. We would invest at the seed stage and really support those founders. We raised a $25 million fund, and we really did that. We were two-thirds deployed through that, and 2 years after, looking at the ecosystem, thinking about raising our next fund. And we saw that the ecosystem, exactly as you said, was maturing. You had companies that were starting to approach the Series A stage. You already had companies in the Series A stage, but more of those that were maturing. And you didn't have a Bitcoin fund that was really investing at the Series A stage and leading those rounds. So that was our thesis, that there might not be enough companies when we started the fund ready to invest in, but we were seeing the momentum in the ecosystem and seeing that over that investment period of 3 to 4 years, there would be more than enough deal flow for us to be able to invest in. And we've certainly seen that. We had first close of the fund around 18 months ago, and deal flow is kind of stronger than we expected. We have 5 core Series A investments now, so we're really, really happy with it, and certainly seeing the maturity in the ecosystem that we had expected, and that is really, really exciting to see.
It's so cool. It really is so cool. And so is there a specific niche within the Bitcoin ecosystem that you guys like? And I'm thinking along maybe an infrastructure lens or something like that, where you're like, this is the type of business that we'd like to own part of going forwards? Or is it more opportunistic in terms of what turns up?
It's more opportunistic. We always have themes or ideas that we want to see built or that we think should be built, but mostly we're waiting for the entrepreneur to really figure that out and build something to a point where we can invest in it. Ultimately, entrepreneurs are typically the ones that are more plugged in. Maybe they have a problem they're solving for themselves, or they're in a company and seeing a problem, or they're deep in Bitcoin technology and seeing what's possible. So they, generally you have entrepreneurs coming in and they've had this specific lens which gave them this specific insight to build the company. So we don't have a specific type of business. We have infrastructure companies, we have B2C companies, we have kind of B2B, really institutional product companies as well. So it really just depends. It depends on the company.
Yeah, and I love that kind of idea of especially as an investor, sitting at this kind of sweet spot where a person has devoted their life for a number of years on solving a problem that they felt or that they saw, and they have not just got the kind of product market fit proof, but actually they're starting to make good revenue. And that is a different place to like, I've got this epic idea, or I've had this idea and I built this prototype and look at how it's working. It's just a completely different phase of business, essentially. And so to flip that to the other side, because there are so many highly motivated, ethically aligned, talented people building stuff for Bitcoin or on Bitcoin. From an investor perspective, what are those kind of conversations going like? Is there more institutional money looking to get into this kind of phase? Is it mainly high net wealth that are putting money in? And what's the kind of return profile with that? Because obviously you could just own Bitcoin, right? And that's probably going to do pretty well for you. So yeah, I'd love to learn more about the other side to that scale.
You mean who's investing in the first check-in?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
as the leading fund working in and around Series A and Bitcoin, who's giving you a call and saying, okay, we now like the look of this. What can we do?
There are a few funds in the ecosystem that are investing earlier, and we do also invest at all the way from pre-seed, seed through to Series A in the fund. It's just the largest numbers go into the Series A checks.
Sure.
So I think if anyone's out there in building, the best way to get the first check is usually friends and family or angel investors. When you just have an idea and you just need some funding, the best way to do it really is if you can bootstrap it, invest your own money. But of course, if that's not possible, then friends and family is a really good way to do it. And then there's a variety of funds out there, whether it's TimeChain or Fulgur, or there's a few other ones as well that do invest earlier and smaller checks as well. So there is pretty decent capital available.
Andy, what I more meant was like, so you guys obviously have a fund structure and you're taking money from other people. So who are those other people, just generally speaking?
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So because obviously,
who are our LPs?
Yes. Yeah. So those LPs, they can put their money anywhere. So why are they looking here? And I'd love to have a flavor for those kind of conversations.
Yeah, most of our LPs, I would say, are ultra high net worth investors that are Bitcoiners, that most of them, I would say, have built a business themselves. So they kind of get what it means to build a business. They also get kind of a lot of the problems in the world and in the economy. And most of them, in fact, I'm so sure all of them have a very significant Bitcoin investment. And so the investment in our fund would sit alongside their Bitcoin investment. We wouldn't really ever have an investor that invests in this instead of Bitcoin. We really see it as an additional way to get exposure to the Bitcoin ecosystem, which could exceed the rate of return of Bitcoin and is also partially decorrelated with Bitcoin. So we definitely target returns in excess of Bitcoin, and certainly founders coming into the space sort of have that mindset already of Bitcoin is the hurdle rate. So they do need to beat Bitcoin as the hurdle rate. You have companies that are generating Bitcoin directly, and so earning in Bitcoin. So kind of naturally, you're accelerating that accumulation of Bitcoin. So that's really why our investors invest a lot. Some want to support the ecosystem, but ultimately they think that it does have the potential to have really strong returns. And I think the decorrelation helps as well. Like we have companies that their revenue is not linked to the Bitcoin price because the service they're providing is payments on Bitcoin, for instance, for businesses, which the business runs regardless of the Bitcoin price.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about how you think about decorrelation because, and case study being, and full confession, the last 6 weeks has been a really brutal experience for me as a private investor of my own capital. And net assets for me over 14 months are like 60% down. And I committed to buying a house and doing a renovation. And there's a whole load of headache that's come with that. It's been very stressful for my wife and I. And I just went hardcore Bitcoin. I was like, this is the thing that's going to fucking do it. And I absolutely still believe that. But the volatility for about 3.5 years, I was sitting on a 5x. And I'm like, this is a no-brainer. Why wouldn't everyone do this? And suddenly that becomes, I mean, it's still 2.5, 3. It's great. But you're pegged to this previous price. And there's a whole, I mean, talk about mind games. You're playing mind games with yourself all day long and trying not to self-sabotage. And I'm having to do lots of work on that. But the uncorrelated nature of what you're talking about has, for the first time, really hit home to me as to how valuable that is. Because you're not just getting pure Bitcoin price exposure, and it is going to be volatile over multi-year ranges, not just like 6 months, but like in 4 years' time, it might not be where you thought it was going to be. So, yeah, how compelling is that to an investor when you're speaking to them? And is that specifically what they're looking for? Because after my experience, that would be a real selling point.
Yeah, I get it. No, I know it has been tough, and it is difficult sort of mentally and emotionally to, I've been going through the same thing. It is difficult mentally and emotionally to navigate that. I would say historically that has not been a major selling point for our LPs. It's something we've always talked about. I don't know how much, to be honest, that's been a major selling point. But yeah, it's interesting. Maybe after this latest drawdown in our next fund, it might be more interesting. I know for me personally, it does make life easier that I'm not sort of with the fund and the business. If I have people I know that have kind of liquid crypto investment funds, and there it's like everything they've worked for is just like down 80%, and that's extraordinarily difficult.
Yes.
Whereas for us, our companies keep building and they just keep going through. And if, we have a company called LN Markets, which is derivatives trading. And so when you have volatility, they benefit because people want to kind of trade and do derivatives. So that was definitely important for us going in. And when we do invest in companies, we always look for companies that can build through and grow revenue through down cycles and through bear markets. And that is something really important we look for in companies as well.
Cool. Yeah, it's not something I would have batted an eyelid at in terms of correlation previously, but now it's definitely something. Oh, that's interesting. Another space that personally it's highlighted for me as well is in a sense I was the same. I was like a crypto fund, but just on a private basis, and so it's like all of life that was being paid for previously has now become twice as expensive. You're like, that wasn't quite as good a plan as I thought it was. And one of my mentors I was talking to last night, this phrase is like, I spoke about this recently. I would join Daniel Prince on his podcast. Mike Tyson at some point quoted, "Everyone thinks they're great till they get smacked in the face." And you're like, oh, that's kind of what it feels like, right? Like, why didn't everyone do this? They're all idiots. I've killed it. Here we go. I've got my time. I can do all this stuff. And then poof, you're like, oh. And so now you have to react. One of the steps I will take for sure is making money with my time. Previously, I was pegged to a net wealth, and that was my psychological peg to doing well. Whereas actually, if you're making money off your time, this sounds really simple to most people, I'm sure, and first world problems for me, admittedly, that is a natural hedge against any drawdown. So there's a number of steps I'm going to put in to make sure that I never feel like this again. Really
and
interesting.
That's exactly what emotions are for, by the way. It's like, that's why you're feeling the emotion. Like, this is why emotions are so important. You could go and do a meditation and be like, it's all okay, all the world is fine, and I can just live. Or you can be like, hey, I don't like feeling like this. How can I put steps in place to make sure that in future I don't feel like this? And that's like what the emotion is there for.
Yeah, and I could share as well, just on that emotion front. Again, it's my conversation with Daniel that's making me think about this. So I was at boarding school in the UK from the age of 8 to 18. And Daniel and I were talking in detail about what that experience was like. But in many ways, it's a emotion suppression process. And so as a young boy, you get thrown into this environment where it's like you show any emotion and you get bullied straight away. So you just don't. And therefore, I'm fine. And this system produces, a British private school system produces political leaders, business leaders, judges, the whole shebang. And none of them have felt anything since the age of 8. How crazy is that? Yeah. And I know that's true because I've got friends like that and myself at times. And so one thing that we're trying to do with our kids is to allow them to express emotion and say things like, you're okay, you can be upset. hitting's not something that's okay, or whatever the case might be. But it's so funny because the triggers of your children, I get furious. And one of the reasons I get furious is because they're getting upset. And part of me is a little Jake inside who wants to be upset and was never allowed to be. And you're like, oh, what is this journey that's life? You know, these lessons you're getting now I'm I'll be 38 in June. You're like, Christ, you just don't know what's going to come up, do you?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, this British private school system sounds so horrible. Like it's kind of culty.
It's very
What I
culty.
understand.
And actually,
It's like really not healthy. And I have a lot of compassion. I remember reading do you know Roald Dahl?
yep.
And he wrote the book about his childhood and wrote all about his experience in
Oh, I've
this
read
private
that.
school. And I remember being horrified.
What the hell was the
It's
book
like
called?
Boy, maybe?
Yeah,
I read
about
it decades,
It's
like
an excellent
years
book.
ago.
Yeah.
But it was like, whoa.
What it's making me think about,
so
Andy,
bad.
is your description earlier of being in a cult and being like, it's just a reaction. It's kind of like what you would see in dormitories when boys are just losing it. They just lost it. And it's like, well, it's because they're not supposed to be here, right? It's like, oh, that's just a reaction. They can come over here, you know? Whoa, interesting. Oh, Andy. Okay, well, listen, we're pushing up to the hour, and I could go for like another 2 or 3, and we touched on all sorts of subjects that we just didn't have time for today. But really awesome to spend some time with you. Thank you so much. And the thing I always enjoy so much about having done podcasts for a few different years now is seeing people's progress. Because we had a conversation before, and you see what happens in between. It's really awesome to see. So thank you for sharing everything today. Just one final question is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, no, not specifically. Nothing comes to mind.
Cool.
No, thanks for
Well,
having me
Andy,
on, and it's been a great conversation, so appreciate it.
my pleasure. Where can people reach you if they want to get in touch?
So to follow my Substack, it's called the Clyra Passages, Clyra. If you Google search it, it'll come up. And you can follow me on Twitter. I am at the number 1, and then Andi Pitt, ANDIPITT.
Perfect. And I'll pop those into the show notes as well.
Perfect.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much. Bye.